Testing. Hi, everyone. It's 6:30. Our co-chairs are now unmuted, and we'll be getting started very soon as they're ready.
How do I get everybody up? Sorry, I'm just trying to fix this 1 second. Are the electeds on yet? Are the electeds on?
I don't see any of them yet.
I just lost everybody. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was.
Okay, should we start? We have pretty much everybody here. Hello, everyone. I'm Valerie Mason, and with my co-chair, Sarah Chu, I would tell you which box she's in, but I can't tell. Can't tell right now. We're commencing the meeting of the Small Business Committee of Community Board 8. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming. A couple of details. I appreciate everyone attending this evening. I just want to say that there will be another meeting that many small businesses may be interested in, and that's going to be on Thursday night. And it's a really great session, and it's entitled Restarting Our Neighborhoods, Session 2. And the focus will be on legal and human resources. And it will be a very informative session discussing what you need to know in reopening your business. It's going to go beyond just restaurants and talk about your, what precautions you need to take if you're if you have employees, etc. We've already had one in a series of, I believe there will be 4 meetings, and they are very informative and worthwhile attending. So I would put that also on your calendar for this week. Tonight, we're going to focus on trying to help our restaurants regain their footing post-COVID in the reopening of New York City. This is a very hot topic for everyone. Even those of us who don't own restaurants want our neighborhoods to thrive and be as vibrant as they were the day we sort of self-imposed shutdown back in March. Tonight, we're focusing on, well, a couple of events happened. We started this discussion at the community board at the transportation committee meeting earlier this month. And it was referenced in connection with legislation that had been introduced in the city council, which was focused on providing more temporary outdoor space to restaurants, given the fact that the regulations really prohibit any indoor dining. And the council acted, and various proposals were put forth. The legislation, I can't remember the intro, and I don't want to take time looking for it, but the link was on the meeting announcement that we had for this evening. And essentially, right after our meeting, right after we were talking to Colleen Chattergoon from Department of Transportation, the next morning, the mayor announced sort of a different plan. And basically said, if there was an open street, you could take advantage of that. And so now the various agencies are looking at how can we best help these restaurants reopen, and what could be available to them to help maximize their outdoor space. And so as part of the Small Business Committee, we wanted to sort of give a forum to those restaurant owners, to hear where the city stood in terms of the planning, and then also what ideas come from the community and the business owners, because, hey, it's your business. You are in the best position to know what can possibly help you, and to create a forum that your voice can get to the electeds, to the city agencies, to try to make this concept, which sounds great conceptually, work from a practical point of view and bring the local restaurants back as soon as we can. So unfortunately, there's not a lot I can tell you in terms of policy. So in a sense, there are various agencies that are charged to try to get this reopening going. And I thought the easiest way to do this would be, and you've probably heard a lot about, what the possibilities are. So I think first, I'm going to throw it to Ben Kalos, who I can see on the screen, to talk about perhaps what the theory was behind the legislation. Just make a brief presentation, and then we'll go to, I don't know if Keith is on, Keith Powers. Oh, there he is. I see him now. Sorry. This is like Hollywood Squares times 10. And then we will throw it, and then we will hear from Pauline Chattergoon and Kimberly Rancourt from the Department of Transportation and Pauline Ferranti from the Department of Health. And I think what we're really going to do is try to leave a large part of this meeting for a dialogue with hopefully restaurant owners and members of the community to come up with ideas, because I think, quite frankly, on the Upper East Side, we are going to have some restrictions that are just not, it's not easy to put tables in the middle of First, or not even the middle, on the curbside of First Avenue and Second Avenue. So we're going to try to talk about that. So, rock, paper, scissors, Ben and Keith, whoever's going to talk first.
Let's unmute both of them so they can both speak.
I'm going to defer to Keith on this because he started working on this in April, and I started working on it when people took over our street corners to throw parties at 100 people at a time. So I'll let him talk about the history between him and the borough president, and then we can jump on and talk about our work together. Keith, does that sound right?
I'm not seeing Keith all of a sudden.
Yeah, I don't know where his video went.
Hey guys, sorry. I'm fixing, hold on. All right, hey there, sorry.
Oh, there he is, okay.
Am I
Go
up?
ahead, Keith. Yeah, you're up. Better up.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. First of all, nice to see you, and I hope everybody's hanging in. And it's been, for sure, a challenging few weeks on top of a challenging few months. So I hope everybody is doing their best to hang in. And thanks to, I see DOT and others who are here as well. Do you want me to talk about just the outdoor dining, or what's the best place to start?
Yeah, I think talk about outdoor dining, and when you guys put this together, what were you kind of thinking? And then, we can, then you can talk about where we are.
Okay, sure, we'll do. So first of all, it's been a very challenging few months for small business owners. We don't have to tell anybody that. I see some that are on here as well. And as we are getting to a safer place of reopening, I think a lot of us are trying to be as creative and supportive as we can of our neighborhood businesses to figure out ways that they can get open a little sooner, make a little bit more money now, and hopefully be able to ride through a very difficult moment, but to get them to a better place. Second is we had the recognition here that reopening is going to mean limited capacity in a lot of places for retail and for dining. It's going to mean having to figure out how to get people into spaces in a safe way, a whole host of things. And I think it was probably one of the earliest people who started talking about this, but I said, we're going to have a summer where we're going to have a lot less people coming into the city, particularly Manhattan. We're going to have office space probably not reopening in a real way until September. And we really want to help out many of those who are our cherished small business owners here. And like so many other cities are doing and do all the time, we have lots of outdoor space that maybe could be made available to folks to be able to be used, to be able to let them do a little bit more capacity outside while opening it in the inside in a safe way. And that the reality is we're probably not going to be able to get some places open at 100% indoor capacity for some time, fear of a second wave and everything else. So I had been pushing this idea with folks in the retail and restaurant industry about what if we are able to use and be accommodating of space that's going to be lower use this summer to let them get up and get up running. Not totally dissimilar from a sidewalk cafe, but we'll talk about more space and different space and things like that. So the council has a bill, which I'm a sponsor of, that creates a pathway and a system to allow for that sidewalk space, street space, plazas, you name it, to be able to be utilized. As we were getting to our council hearing on that bill, the city and the DOT and the mayor's office came out and made an announcement that they agreed with it, and they were going to start a process of moving forward on a plan to get restaurants are in really, I think, phase 3, but to allow phase 2, which should start hopefully next week, to be able to be include outdoor dining. Now, there's lots of challenges. One is, which space are we talking about? Are we taking away street space? Are we talking about expanded sidewalk space? I think the answer, frankly, is going to be a little bit of all of the above. It's going to be, I think the burden's going to be on the business owner to be able to figure out a plan and submit it to the city. I think the process, I'll let Colleen or whoever else talk about it a bit, but I think the process is going to start fairly soon. And businesses are going to have to come up with a proposal to be able to do this. I am very into it. I think the couple of concerns that one might just reasonably expect here are what hours of operation, crowd control, ensuring safety and social distancing while doing this. And we have seen lots of the establishments on the Upper East Side doing a de facto version of this, which is just opening up to go and letting people sort of hang out on the sidewalks. We want something with a little more structure around that, because I just, we don't want neighbors to be nuisance, have a nuisance, and we don't want to do this in an unsafe way. So actually having tables or having structure to this, I think, helps do this. And I think there could be places where you take the open streets program and you allow for them to take a closed street down. I think there's opportunities to take public plazas and public space and put stuff out there, and also just to use it, look at underutilized street space as part of this. But ultimately, I think I'll just maybe close a little bit this, but I think that if you look at how, for many of these places, how much they're paying in rent, even if you do to go or take out or 25% capacity, paying the bills, just paying the rent is extremely hard at the amount that we're talking about. So giving a little more capacity, a little bit more ways to make money is one of the pathways that we keep folks open. And I've talked to a lot of folks about this recently to feel pretty comfortable saying that. And we need that. We all live in our neighborhoods for a lot of reasons, but I think particularly because we love the places that occupy our ground floor in our neighborhoods, and we want to make sure they thrive and they stay open. So we had a hearing on this. The plan from the city is going to be the plan that the mayor's office announced, I think, opens fairly soon to start accepting applications. And we may or may not pass legislation, but I think we do want to make sure we have some guiding posts here in terms of how to make sure we can make sure things don't get out of control.
Okay, thanks. Ben, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Thank you very much, Keith, for working on this for several months, even before it really became a problem on the east side. I just want to start by just saying it is really nice to see so very many of you. Many of you are longtime members of Community Board who I've gotten to serve with. Some of you worked in government with Keith and I when we were in Jonathan Bing's office. I see Taina, who worked at Hunter and was a close partner that we worked with in Assemblymember Bing's office. I see Elizabeth Rose, who was appointed to Community Board, who joins us from the Department of Education. Felice Farber, and just so many new members and new faces, and both new and old, every age, but just so good to see everyone and to see such wide attendance. I also want to recognize that I see a lot of representation from the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. I see Bob, who's got, I believe, a shoe store in the neighborhood. Is that correct, Bob? Absolutely. And what do you call it? And I also see Courtney Bond, the proprietor of a ice cream store in the neighborhood, UES, and there is nothing else there. Do not pay attention to anything in her background. It is completely just ice cream. There are no drinks that catch fire. And just I want to thank everyone in the fact that there is this space for business and community leaders and just so many members of CB8. So as mentioned, Gail Brewer is amazing. It is hard to get ahead of Gail Brewer. And in April, she did a letter with Keith Powers, Carlina Rivera, Speaker Johnson saying that we needed to do this. In May, it started to get warm out. And then we saw places that we know and love. I think on like 82nd Street and 2nd Avenue, it made international news about all the New Yorkers partying on our sidewalks. And in response, I was just like, I spoke to the 19th precinct and they're like, yeah, we went by, we tried to issue warnings, but we're not going to arrest people. We're not going to do things like that. Even during the curfew, they were not enforcing people drinking on the sidewalks in large groups. And so the thought was that in public policy, if you can't get people to do what you want, and what do we want? We want people to stay home. There is still a virus out there. People should stay home, particularly if they are in a population that might be predisposed to the disease. So like the safest thing you can do is stay home. That is the new normal. My daughter says that people should stay home. She is reinforcing the point. So we did a letter that I joined Councilmember Powers and Gail Brewer just saying, and actually asking Department of Transportation to get a program together in time for Memorial Day weekend. That didn't happen. We worked with Antonio Reynoso. Keith and I were both co-prime introductory sponsors to do the legislation. That's what happens when agencies and the city council can't agree. And I think Keith went a lot into it. In the letter that we proposed, we were looking at 2nd Avenue from 49th to 53rd, 55th to 858th, 66th to 70th Street, 73rd to 79th, 81st to 92nd, 1st Avenue from 49th to 64th, 68th Street to 69th, 73rd to 78th, 81st and 84th, 87th to 89th, and then on York Avenue from 75th to 79th and 84th to 86th. If anyone is wearing headphones, I am so terribly sorry. But the idea was I looked at the neighborhoods and that seemed to be parallel to where it was, but we also in the letter asked for the community board to weigh in. So I would love you folks to say whether or not those streets look like places that you think would be great for a green light. Since then, we've also started to have residents reach out and say, can you close my side street? And we've tried to close a lot of side streets in the neighborhood for schools like PS 290, which we have done successfully. The one caveat is it's DOT won't let me close streets where there's already a garage. So if folks are able to identify locations that don't have garages on it, I think we got an email recently from a constituent saying, can you close from 1st Avenue to York Avenue on 82nd Street? And so at least from my mind being, I'm incredibly concerned about how narrow sidewalks are. When I served on Community Board 8 on the Street Life Committee, one of the big concerns was, and I'd love if DOT can address this, the width of the sidewalk only I think needed to, do we have costs or who's the current Street Life chair?
No, Alberto.
So
Abraham Salcedo.
It is
Abraham Salcedo.
If the street is wider than 12 feet, then you can have an 8-foot sidewalk cafe. Is that it, Will? Do you remember the numbers? But
I don't know the numbers.
Either
exactly.
way, if I recall, all they have to leave is 4 feet. And what ends up happening is you have a fire hydrant, you have a tree pit, and then you end up with folks like me with a single stroller and then other families with double wide strollers. And then between the sidewalk cafes and the tree pits, there's no room for anyone to walk around the street safely or social distancing. And so one of the thoughts that I had, which I've seen in many other cities in Europe and including the United States, is converting a lot of our parking spaces. So in places that are very densely concentrated, so like in front of UES, there's a number of restaurants there. And so the idea would be that we could remove the parking from that side of the street and just make that entirely available. UES, I think, is on the same side of the street as like the writing room. And possibly, I think you also end up in a situation with a perhaps Brown Cup, but they have a smaller footprint and lower expectation of seating. Then you also have a diner on the corner. So in that case, there might be a little less space to split up, but we could also wrap around the corner a little bit. So I would love to see that entire parking lane available to those restaurants. And then across the street, there are an additional row of restaurants. So on those sides of streets, I would love to see the parking on both sides of the street converted. And then we might want to, in order to avoid conflicts with bikes, and again, this is up to you and we'll want to hear from you, is move the bike lane over so that you don't have waiters trying to get past bikers going through, and then just have it redirect around it and have cones. And then there's also been some very beautiful stuff that people have done creatively to make it more than just tables and chairs in the streets. I've seen folks do class enclosures. I've seen folks do different type of faux hedges. So I'm looking for it to be beautiful. And I know with some of the businesses we have here that it would be beautiful. And I think ultimately we're looking to hear from you. It should not be top down, it should be bottom up. And the community board is the grassroots of the city. So I've gone on long enough. I'm eager to hear from you. And I'm checking to see if I have staff on the call to make. I do have Abby Damsky on the call. So I may have to hop because we're doing an education town hall at 8 o'clock on parenting during the pandemic. If anyone wants to join us, please make sure to RSVP at benkalis.com/events. But Abby will be here to listen. And my daughter is, of course, very, very excited about this. And we need more parents in government, and we need more parents on the community board.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I think at this point, I didn't hear Ben say he was eliminating the bike lane. I think you said you wanted to move it, which is an interesting concept. I want to throw it over to the Department of Transportation, Colleen Chattergoon and her colleague, Kimberly Rancourt, because they need to leave at 7:30. And since the mayor pretty much opened it up to DOT, I wanted Colleen to describe how this process of application for sidewalk space is going to work. So Colleen, thank you very much for joining us. Go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Councilmember Kalos and Councilmember Powers, for your report. Is really excellent. I'm going to actually ask my colleague, Kimberly Rancourt, to give an update on the legislation and the whole process with the outdoor dining, because she's been working closely with my colleagues in other divisions to put this together. So I'll turn it over to Kimberly, and then I'll stay on if you have additional questions.
Thanks.
Everyone, thanks for having us here tonight. And the council members did already touch on a number of points related to the Open Restaurants Initiative. As far as timing, because I think that's kind of on the top of everyone's mind, knowing that we are going to potentially be entering into phase 2 next week. And so we are aiming to have this up and running by the end of the week in time for that. So hopefully we'll be able to share some good news in the coming days. And the idea is to allow businesses to use sidewalk space or space in the curb lane in front of their business, in front of their restaurant, to provide tables and chairs for dining, of course. And essentially, it's an as-of-right program, so that if you go online once it's up and running and you read through the criteria, which are still being finalized, and you're able to meet those criteria, and then you agree to follow certain guidelines, then you're able to get registered and self-certify online, and then able to set up your tables and chairs and operate that way. So that's kind of the basic overview, and if there's questions I can answer those, but essentially the idea is to get this to be as widespread as possible and to be as fair as possible. We want to make sure that it's a simple process and as inclusive as we can be, understanding that obviously there are different constraints along different streets, and certain businesses will have an easier time finding locations where they can set up versus others.
Okay. I really want to move to questions and discussion as soon as possible. So I wanted to put Pauline Ferrante on from the Department of Health, so she can talk about any criteria that the Department of Health is looking for. I'll make a little bit of an editorial here. It's just, as a lot of things that are done by this city, there doesn't seem to be a lot of coordination yet between, how this is going to work and what all the various agencies that are going to be impacted. And it's unfortunate that the website isn't up yet, that businesses, especially the restaurants, can file for applications. But again, enough of the editorial. Let me throw it over to Pauline to just talk a little bit about the Department of Health and what their role may be in this. And then we'll open it up for discussion. Go ahead, Pauline.
Hi, am I unmuted? I wasn't sure.
I think yes, you are.
Okay, great. And I apologize, my toddler is next to me as well. So, the Department of Health.
Interns are permitted. Interns are permitted. Go ahead.
So what we advise right now is for all restaurant owners to go onto the state's website, because there are certain guidelines that are up already, and the state requires you to develop a safety plan as well as read and affirm the state's guidelines before you can reopen in phase 2, which the date has not yet been set for New York City. However, all of that guidance is on the state's website already. And what we're doing at the health department is working on a checklist for restaurants so that it will be much more clear the things that you will need to do in order to reopen safely. But I think what we're calling the core 4, we want people to just keep these 4 key actions in mind, which is stay home if you are sick and allow your employees to do the same. Maintain social distancing at all times. Wear face coverings and practice healthy hygiene. So if you are a restaurant, this is all, these are things that you are already doing with the exception of the face covering. So that will be a new added measure, but I would just advise everyone to go onto the state's website first. They have an entire document for outdoor and takeout for phase 2. And if you are unable to have outdoor seating, indoor space and restaurant service will be allowed in phase 3. And I believe that information is also up. So that would be the recommended first step.
Okay, so I think since Kimberly is only on till about 7:30 and Pauline, I don't know how long you can stay.
I'm here for however long you want me, Valerie.
Okay. Colleen is here for the long run. Thank you, Colleen. If we could maybe hear, I don't know, from members of the community who are specifically restaurant owners who may have questions, and then we'll open the discussion a little bit more. Does anybody fit that bill? Or somebody who represents restaurants like Rob Burns? I don't know.
And Valerie, I'll quickly give everybody a little bit of guidance on how the Zoom process works.
Thank you.
You'll need to raise your hand through the participants menu at the bottom of your screen. So you'll want to open the participants menu. It looks like 2 little people standing next to each other, has the number 41 next to it right now. And once you open that, you'll find a button that says raise hand. If you click that, we'll see your hand go up and we'll be able to unmute you. And so I saw during that time, Robert raised his hand. Valerie, would you like me to unmute him?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Valerie. I don't have a lot to say except for, yeah, the restaurants want to get out there, obviously. They're waiting for the plan, getting frustrated about the plan. Frankly, a couple of my restaurants have been going rogue. I don't support that. I'm not reporting them, but I don't support that. It's been weeks now that since council and the administration has said we're going to move forward with an outdoor dining plan. I don't know. I get it's a little complex, but it's not so complex. It should take weeks to get it out there. Yeah, the faster we can do this, the better. The better for the restaurants, better for our communities, and that's all I have to say. Let real restaurateurs speak to the rest, but we have to move forward. So thank you.
Thanks.
Mute me now.
Valerie, can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I'm taking notes. So Kimberly, may I ask, as you mentioned that the legislation was that this was an as of right process, and as long as restaurant owners met the guidelines, they'd be able to operate. Are you able to summarize the guidelines, or have they not been developed yet?
They're currently being finalized. So as I mentioned, they should be available by the end of the week. And I would prefer to hold off on that. I mean, in general, it's about maintaining ADA and just other safety measures, enough clearance for pedestrians to pass and that sort of thing. But yeah, so this should be out shortly. And as of right, meaning that if you're able to self-certify, we're not going to be reviewing all of the applications. So as soon as you fill out the form online and you're self-certified, then you're able to move forward. You don't have to, there's no way for us, we don't have the capacity to review applications from 27,000 restaurants. And that said, we do also, reserve the right to take away that ability to do so if there are a lot of issues with a certain location, or if they're not following through on their following the guidelines.
Thank you.
Will, anybody?
I don't see anybody else from the public who has their hand up,
Okay.
but Craig later has his hand up from the community board. Oh, and
Okay.
Cause.
Go ahead, Craig.
Craig.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Transportation Committee, I just want to alert everyone that I assume Valerie mentioned this, I did come in a moment or so late, but we did pass a resolution. It is a somewhat detailed, lengthy resolution, but maybe Will can link to it if anyone wants to see it, especially because we did mention that we would be willing to modify it depending on how the conversation goes tonight and any new information that's come out since our meeting. And we know that now with DOT taking the lead, there is some new information since we had our meeting a couple of weeks ago. That being said, I think we had structured our resolution in a very loose fashion, essentially saying we are supportive of outdoor seating, expanding into parking spaces and additional sidewalk space. I do want to highlight one of the concerns that came up numerous times, which was making sure that this is a fair and equitable process to the fullest extent possible, especially for restaurants that may be unfortunately situated. Those that have infrastructure adjacent to them, such as fire hydrants or other sensitive places where they would not be permitted to put in seating in front of them in the curbside, or say where the bus lane is located. I know at our meeting, Colleen indicated that shifting bike lanes is probably an easier proposition than shifting bus lanes. And especially those restaurants that are situated on side streets that may have other considerations as well. And those are some of the things we focus on. My other concern, or my other personal opinion, is I think if we look at what other places have done, other cities across the world, there's a lot of creativity out there in terms of how we've looked at opportunities, or cities have looked at opportunities to create vibrant spaces that can fit into the context of neighborhoods to allow restaurants in those locations that may not have access right in front of them to curbsides to be able to still take advantage of it. I've seen ideas as to regarding shared spaces and being able to, even if waiters, servers have to walk longer distances, that they would be willing to do so. And other cities do that, where they can use side streets if the area isn't available in front of them. So I just want to put that out there. And in case the committee, the Small Business Committee, decides to do something, that we may have a framework that works for you. So I'll possibly chime in later, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, I just wanted to, anybody will?
Yeah, Cause, Alita, and then Rita Popper.
Okay, great. Sure.
Cause?
Yep. Yeah, I'm on. you mentioned something about the fact that it's as of. So if I get the okay, do I take the parking space 24 hours or only certain times of the day? And also, if you're going to be closing a street, the whole street, this is in reference to, you know, I know Queens is doing, thinking of 30th Avenue from 34th to 37th, that they would close off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if I get the parking space, do I have it 24 hours? My other question is, do I have to abide by city rules or state rules? Currently, if I have a liquor license, I can only serve in certain areas. I take over the parking space. Am I allowed to serve liquor out there, or do I have to apply for a license, which takes a year?
So I'm sorry, I couldn't hear everything that you said. I definitely heard the last piece about the state versus city. And I think that's, you know, when we're talking about, I mean, it hasn't been 2 weeks yet since we had the council hearing, and we've been working through this process. But part of the reason why this does take time is to figure out some of the issues around those, you know, the coordination between different legislations. So I think that will be clearer in the coming days when we can provide more finalized advice on that sort of issue. And then the question before that was about,
yeah, the parking spot. If I take over the parking spot, do I get it 24 hours or only certain times of the day?
my understanding at this point from what I've been following is that it's 24 hours. So that doesn't mean that you can serve there 24 hours, but I believe that you're able to leave, especially since we will be looking for people to have vertical delineations. I believe that the furniture can stay there overnight, but again, there's been conversations back and forth. So once we have the final guidelines, it'll be more solid and clear.
But wouldn't it be better to keep it like outdoor cafes are now 10 o'clock during the week and, 11, 12 Fridays and Saturdays?
So I'm not saying that they can operate during those times, but my understanding is that they'll be able to leave the delineation out there.
Thank you.
Lita, I think you were next.
Thanks, Valerie. Thanks, Will. I had a question and then a general comment. Who is legally responsible if anyone gets hurt? I mean, when I park on the street, I have to turn my mirror in and I see those up and down the side streets because of how close the cars can get to each other, especially if there are trucks. So if someone gets up and stumbles into the street, or a car turns the corner in too wide an arc, and someone is injured, unfortunately, is that the restaurant's responsibility? Is that the city's responsibility? Who ultimately is responsible? And then I also wanted to just ask if we could be creative about ideas. I've been to the night market in Queens, and I'm not suggesting anything nearly that congested, but there are plenty of schoolyards around. There are construction sites where nothing is being built. If it's possible to use those and have restaurants come in and have it on a rotating basis, it just feels that we need to be more creative to be able to help the restaurants that are not on the blocks that have been delineated or are in front of a fire hydrant or a bus stop or something else. And to be fair to everyone, it would seem that some kind of creativity and rotating system would be beneficial. So thank you.
So I think in response to the liability questions, again, that's something that of course we've had to go back and forth with and work with various folks at city agencies around. So I don't have a final answer on that either. I mean, the timing of this meeting is a little bit unfortunate because if it were a few days from now, I think we'd have a lot more of the details. But more to come on that. And then as far as creativity, obviously we've been having a lot of conversations with people about what this will mean for them and what other options are out there. And I think our approach at this point is let's get this out there. Let's see how it's working. Let's and continue to have conversations about other potential solutions. So your meeting tonight and your whatever ideas you're sharing is very welcome, and we're happy to hear that. But it's been a pretty big effort for us to get this going, and we'll look to like what we might be able to layer in or add on to that after it's up and running.
And I apologize if I was redundant. I joined a few minutes late. Thank you. I'm all in favor of helping the businesses that we can. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is Rita next, or did I?
You're correct. Rita is next. Rita, you may have to push a button on your screen. There you go.
91st Street is a closed street, and a very wide closed street, and it could be used better than it is being used right now. I must say that every bench is filled, but there is plenty of room for people to come. And as I've noticed, it's not food that people are eating on 2nd Avenue. It is drinking, and it is mingling. That, you know, they're just tired of being home. It's not that they want to eat, they just want to communicate. So we do have a perfect spot for that. Bring something. The only thing I'm concerned about is glass bottles, since there are children who play on the street. So I just wanted to remind everybody that East 91st Street is already a closed street.
Thank you, Rita. Next, we do have Barbara Rudder. Barbara, you may have to push a button.
Mute. Okay, you hear me now?
Yes.
I love the ideas of using the sidewalks as well as the streets. I'm just wondering how rigid they are. I'll give one example. One of my favorite restaurants is a teeny restaurant in 84th Street. I don't think people know it's Italianissimo. You don't know it's there unless you know it's there. And I love it. And they're going to struggle. Next door to them, there is a tutoring place that's open just a couple of hours. If they make a deal with the people next door to put a few seats out there, would that be allowed? It's a side street rather than, it would be too narrow to take over the street itself. But he's very afraid of losing his liquor license and getting into trouble. How flexible can we be with restaurants that want to do wait service outside that maybe isn't exactly in the plan? It would really help some of these restaurants out, the little restaurants out a lot, I think.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. And I think, our goal is to be inclusive and flexible to some degree while also having some kind of standard set process and procedure and guidelines. So again, I think it'll be, some of that might be clearer in the coming days, but also we'd be happy to continue to have those kinds of conversations. I mean, I'm sure that once this is up and running, our office is going to be hearing all sorts of ideas from folks on how we can maybe adapt the program a little bit to meet their needs. Yeah. So I'd encourage ongoing dialogue.
Can I just jump in here but Kimberly, I think to sort of follow up on what Rob is saying, I think this is the frustration of the restaurant owners, is that we already know, and to follow up on what Barbara said, we already know that the spaces outside a lot of these restaurants, especially on the Upper East Side, is very small. And so it would seem, even at the outset, that if they could make an application that said that they could use an adjacent storefront, or they've made an arrangement with an empty storefront across the street, that should already be in what the DOT is considering on day one. Because if the restaurant has to wait another 5 weeks for this plan to be considered, that's 5 weeks of lost income. It could be the difference between success and dying. I mean, I think we've been hearing a lot from different restaurant owners and trying to be as creative as we can and talk on their behalf tonight, because many of them are working takeout and can't be on the Zoom call tonight. But it just seems to me that because I think a lot of people's opinion, we're so late in really having something to roll out here, that the creativity could already be in place. And the store owners, again, as I said, if they file an app and it says that the person next door is willing to allow them to use their street, their storefront or whatever, it's going to be a lot more successful, especially here on the Upper East Side, where, I mean, I can't imagine DOT really allowing the parking. I mean, the parking, so using the parking spaces on 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue sounds great in theory, but in practice, I mean, I've heard a lot of restaurant owners say to me, we would rather have the cars remain in the parking spots as buffers between us and the traffic and take the bike lanes and use those as areas to put down tables, because customers, quite frankly, would feel more, safe if they had a huge buffer between them and the traffic. So I think I want to go back to Councilmember Kalos's point about moving the bike lanes. I mean, let's face it, the bike lanes have only been open for a couple of months or years, and there's only 2 avenues that have them. So I think bike riders could be temporarily inconvenienced for a couple of months so that some of these restaurants could get back on their feet. And we could all use a little inconvenience to help these people out in the easy and in the best way we can, and give them as much space as possible. So I really think that that's something that the DOT should consider now. The other thing I want to raise, and we'll go back to the, is what happens if you are currently paying for your outdoor sidewalk space, and now we're giving temporary space essentially for free to everybody else? Will those owners get a credit, or has that even been considered?
For the last piece, I don't have that answer. I'd be happy to look into it for you guys and get back to you. For what you were talking about before that, I really hear what you're saying. I just want to remind you that, like, in this time, I mean, always at DOT, we're balancing the need, like a very limited space with a lot of different competing needs. And that feels to be even more true as we go through this recovery. So we have people looking for more space to walk so they can be walking socially distant. We have people looking to use outdoor dining and have space for their chairs and tables. We still need to maintain loading access on streets for businesses so that they can get their deliveries. We are having people asking for more bike lanes and temporary bike lanes. And so, we're really balancing a lot of different things. And we have to keep that in mind as we still have this limited space, and with social distancing, it becomes even more limited and constrained. So I hear what you're saying.
But I guess but I think that's why, in some ways, the mayor taking this over and taking this out of the hands of the local community boards and advice is really to the detriment, because we know more about our specific small area and can be more helpful. Like, the sidewalks on 1st Avenue are much narrower than the sidewalks on 2nd Avenue. So it's a completely different set of problems. And I just want to go back, your plan, or the one that's being looked at now by DOT, is not just limited to the streets that were recommended by the city council. Is that correct? I mean, if you're a restaurant, you can just make an application. You're not limited to those specific streets. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Sorry, any other questions, points?
We have several other board members who have their hands raised. Barry, Billy, Michelle, Elizabeth, Craig, Rita, and I see Councilmember Kalos has his hand up, so I want to.
Sure. I just want to clarify, and I think Valerie got it, but I'm not sure if DOT got it. When there's construction in the neighborhood and they need to take a lane of traffic, or even of the bike lane or parking, the construction company will move the bike lane over, and they will set up cones so that you can get around it. So that is kind of what I was thinking about for the parking. And then the other, in terms of for moving the sidewalk cafes into the bike lane and parking. And then the other piece is, I don't think that restaurants should be restricted to just in front of their storefront. I think restaurants should be able to achieve the same capacity as they would have indoors. I did mention some locations where that might be tough, but given the different sizes of the locations, I could envision that if you have 10 possible storefronts and only 4 that are restaurants, that they could use the entire block so that they could achieve the number of seats that they would otherwise need. So, and I think one thing that I would hope for to have from Community Board 8, and I'm not sure if DOT would be helpful, is an idea of different locations and whether it's a blanket permission across the district, if you can do it wherever you want, or specific corridors that folks on the community board would be interested in seeing it. I think that would be helpful for me. And I'm also curious if DOT would find it helpful. DOT, would that be helpful?
Specific corridors for like where you would want to shift a bike lane or something like that, or specific, sorry.
For shifting bike lanes, but more likely so being able to devote an entire street of parking for the small businesses to do outdoor seating.
So I think we are, yes, I think that would be helpful. I think that this program, as it starts out, is sort of meant as an individual business so that each business can apply or self-certify. Looking at more creative approaches or block level approaches, which is something that we can do in the coming weeks as well. And I think that makes a lot of sense around bike lanes, right? Because you can't just have each individual business putting out cones to have bikes go back and forth from the curb to further out or anything like that. So it would have to be a more coordinated approach, and hearing from both your office and the community board about where those types of block level or corridor long approaches are desirable would be helpful.
And for folks on participating today, if there are questions that can't be answered right now because the policy is not yet out, I'm collecting your questions, and we can put them in the minutes and share them with the department later.
Thanks, Sarah.
Are you ready? I did see somebody waving earlier. I see 2 actually, Lynn Cashman and Bob. I think that they would both like to say something. So with your permission, I'll jump back to,
sure.
Okay, Bob, and then Lynn, you're next.
Good evening, all. I'm not a restaurant. I have 2 stores on the Upper East Side, one at 2nd Avenue and 79th, one at 3rd Avenue and 75th. And as a retailer, talk about spreading out, Ben, but we could also block our retailers who are adjacent to our restaurants and make them invisible. And we're already in a real deep doo-doo in terms of where business is. And I thought you would want to know. We opened last week. We are 20% of LY for the first week and a half. So we did 80% less business this year than we did last year. Probably no one's surprised. And we were down 97% for 2.5 months, which I don't know that we'll be able to actually get out of. But we have to start thinking about shopping local. Yes, I'm with the restaurants, but the retailers, the loyalty is horrendous. So I'm here as the old man, still fighting the battle. I don't know how much more I've got, but I'm still here. So we need your help. Thank you for listening. And I'll try to attend as many of these as I can.
Thank you very much, Bob. Do you want to say the name of your store since you're on?
NSLOW is the name of the store, ENESLOW, Shoes and Orthotics. 1909 we opened. I'm looking pretty good. And thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
So the other person was Lynn Cashman. I'm gonna unmute her for her to raise her question. And then we'll go back to board members. Then you may have to push a button at the bottom of your screen. Hey.
My concern, I'm all for restaurants. We want them back, but I'm concerned about noise, dirt, and also maneuvering around all these restaurants that are now going to be on the sidewalk or partly in the bike lane or the parking lane. how are we going to regulate that? Because as you said before, some of the sidewalks are very narrow, and then there's also construction going on. I live on 2nd Avenue and 71st Street.
Noise is always going to be a concern. It's Colleen from DOT. If you recall, when it was the smoking ban in restaurants, in bars, patrons were coming out and they were smoking on the sidewalk, and residents who lived above the level would call and they would complain about, the noise that's happening. And of course, the cleanliness of the sidewalk and the curb lane. So you have to tell yourself that this is something that is going to happen and how we're going to control it and what mechanism is going to be in place. But I think that will fall upon the business owners to do that, to monitor that. They will have to do that. Who's going to be around to do all this enforcement? Geez, we always like to say NYPD, who has their hands full, right? I know. But again, NYPD is the enforcement. They have the enforcement powers to do what they do best. We're not an enforcement agency. We don't have the capability or the mechanism to do that. Complaints, when they're coming, they either go to 311 or they'll call our office and let us know, or to the local precincts. But we don't have any enforcement mechanism. We don't.
The commissioner keeps sort of referring to the honor system and recognizing that this is something that we are doing that is unprecedented, that we are obviously wanting to be out there supporting the businesses as much as we can. But it's a challenge, and it's new, and it's for it to be widespread, we need it to be simple. So we need people to kind of step up and be good neighbors.
And we have all the confidence in, the business owners of doing, wanting to do a great job, not having complaints about, their operations or services. So, we put our trust in them, Barry, did you have a question? Barry, did you have a question? I thought you were in the queue.
Yes, yes, I did. Good evening, and I'm very excited about the idea of public plazas. Do we have an inventory of the public plazas in Community District 8, Colleen?
Well, public plaza, I can get back to you on that list with whatever numbers we have. I'll check with our plaza program and I can share that with Valerie.
Because I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for some of the restaurants who don't have access to the street or sidewalk to use public plazas that are adjacent to their location. And I think we should, with that information, we can go forward through the Small Business Committee and reach out to those restaurants that are.
Or maybe POPs, privately owned spaces. Those are locations that can be looked at too, the POPs. But I can get you a list of the plazas in Community Board 8. That would be great. The other thing we were thinking about, Colleen, and I don't know, we were also thinking about schoolyards that weren't being utilized that might be adjacent to or across the street from a bunch of restaurants. I'm thinking of one block of restaurants that's on 75th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, and there's a huge schoolyard that's across the street that's usually closed, and it could be utilized at night. But I don't know how we would get that information. I think you would probably have to start out with asking the Department of Education, because that's their property. We don't own that property. You'd have to probably start having a dialogue with them and see if they would allow restaurants to utilize that space. Thanks. Yeah. Who's next, Will?
We have Billy, then Michelle, then Elizabeth Rose.
Okay, Billy?
Thanks. I'll try to keep it quick. Just one kind of comment and a question. I was in Connecticut over the weekend, and I don't know if this image is going to turn up well, but I thought that what they were doing was pretty effective with Jersey barriers, Colleen. And I think, I'm sure DOT's put a lot of thought into what it would look like. But my experience was the outdoor dining felt, very safe. There was car traffic parallel to the barriers, but it felt, very safe, Colleen. And I do think, moving the bike lane over would make a lot of sense. It doesn't have to be zero sum. We can protect cyclists. And by the way, a lot of the delivery cyclists that will continue to be relying on by moving the lane over, but hopefully with something that protects the cyclists that is more substantial than cones. I just worry that, that doesn't always work out. So I hope, DOT will be aggressive in making sure that cyclists remain protected. My question, and I apologize if it was answered, is has DOT begun identifying the open spaces? The legislation gives you 7 days from the effective date. This seems like it's very likely to go forward, and I'm hoping that DOT is already proactively identifying so that we don't have any further delay.
Kim, do you know if we've identified the spaces?
Sorry, I was muted. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which spaces specifically? I didn't quite understand the question.
Yeah.
So we have open streets,
Yeah.
which is separate, but of course, at some locations will overlap with open restaurants. So we have open streets throughout the city now. We have more than 40 miles, and we're looking to add more in the coming weeks. And some of those locations are not necessarily on commercial streets with restaurants, but some of them are. And in those cases, it doesn't necessarily provide more space for people to set up tables, given that we need to maintain, maybe in some cases it might give you a bit more space, but we still need to maintain traffic on all of those streets. All the open streets are operating kind of as shared streets with 5 mile per hour local traffic allowed. So it does change the dining experience, I would imagine, on those streets. So there, we would expect to get more applications for open streets from commercial corridors as they start to apply for the open restaurants as well.
Yeah, I apologize for not being clear in the question, and happy to have you get back. I'm familiar with the Open Streets program. I'm specifically referring to the legislation that we're discussing. Intro 1957 says within 7 days, DOT shall identify open spaces that are suitable for a temporary outdoor dining area. And my concern is that DOT is not identifying those now. You're going to wait for the legislation to pass. And I get it, you all have your hands full, but 7 days from the effective date is not a whole lot of time. And we've already spoken tonight about how we've delayed too much in helping our small businesses here. So I would just urge DOT, if it's not happening already, to begin identifying those open spaces. We can play a role, our local businesses can play a role in going to you proactively on our end, but there's also a role for DOT to play in identifying those spaces. So,
but just to clarify, we won't be identifying, that was the legislation, but through our initiative and our program, we won't be identifying locations. We will be setting criteria and guidelines, and then individual restaurants are able to register and self-certify that they have a location that meets those criteria and that they're following guidelines. And then any individual business that's able to do that will be able to put out tables. So we're not going to be going out selecting corridors or places to do.
Wait, so just, and I apologize, just from my understanding, if the legislation says DOT shall identify, is DOT not going to identify even if
the legislation was introduced, but then we came out with our own program in response to the
Basically, Billy, the mayor has preempted the legislation by putting it already in the hands of DOT to come up. So that's why the application process is basically now any restaurant anywhere can make an application. They don't have to be within the blocks that were proposed initially by the council or subject to the item that you're talking about, identification of open sites. But I think to Barry's point, if we knew where a lot of these public spaces were, we could sort of help the restaurants identify what might be accessible to them and give them an opportunity to use it. Sort of like an urban space outdoors, that there would be a communal space and people could, use their creativity to set it up and share it as they saw fit. But,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Just to note that I do have to jump off. If there's any last questions or comments that I can answer before I do so, please let me know.
Michelle has a question. She's waving her hand. Oh, and so is Elizabeth. So let's go to those two.
Yeah. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Yeah, let me catch Kimberly before she jumps off, because I have a couple of things to address. Kimberly and Colleen, hoping you'll have the answers or at least some concept about these questions. Referring to intro 1957, I'm co-chair of the vendor committee, and so that intro refers to vendors. Now, in response to this intro, which I got a couple of weeks ago, I've reached out to the mayor's office and to the Department of Health to find out exactly what the plan is for vendors, because if you have the intro in front of you, you can see that it's rather vague. They do talk about assigning spaces, but they do talk about the DOT as being the primary agency to assign those spaces. As you may or may not know, Community Board 8 has a resolution and has for a while now asking for assigned spaces for vendors a long time ago, because then we would have some control over congestion, sanitation, health, and everything. So, and now carts are now equipped with electronic chips so that they can be traced. Any cart that is brand new gets one. Any license that is up for renewal, if the cart permit is up for renewal, they get one of these chips. But my understanding from the Board of Health and the Department of Health and others is that there is not any kind of protocol in place for using those chips in order to trace or assign location, or to track whether or not the vendors are going into their commissaries, which they're required to do every 24 hours. So I have another question, but I wanted to catch Kimberly before you go. Do you or Colleen have any more information than the mayor's office or the DOH at the moment about how the vendor situation is going to be handled?
So, I mean, the vendors, they are issued permits from Department of Health and I think Department of Consumer Affairs. If I'm not mistaken, it's not our position to displace a vendor. We don't work with displacing vendors. I mean, it's always been our policy that if there's an issue with vendors, we work with the NYPD task force. They have a vendor task force. I don't know if it's still in existence.
They don't have it up north. That's part of Manhattan South. We don't have a task force from the police department in our area. And now, as you may have read, the mayor is taking vendor enforcement out of the hands of the police completely. He's creating a lay vendor enforcement squad, which we've been advocating for 100 years. Of course, it depends on what that looks like, you know, what the ratio is from enforcement to vendors, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to me it becomes a critical issue at the moment because they're very likely going to be in a spot where a restaurant might want to expand onto the street. They are in places, of course, where there's maximum pedestrian traffic because, of course, that's where the business is. So it seems to me that somehow this has to be coordinated.
I think when that time comes, I think we'll have to deal with that issue gradually. I mean, right now, we don't have an answer for you if a vendor decides to come and, set up in that location. I mean, what we can do, I mean, of course, we'll work with the local precinct to address that and, because it becomes a part of an enforcement. Complaints that we get about vendors is the fact that they're always in the commercial metered parking and they're using that space there all day. And of course, we work with NYPD. That's one of the problems.
That's one of it. And if you go into parking spots, those are mainly the inventory trucks for the fruit, vegetable vendors.
And the food as well.
Okay, you don't have any additional information. That's
we don't have, no,
but it is here in the intro. So if you find out anything before I do, and as soon as I do, I will call a vendor meeting. But the moment there's nothing to report, I couldn't get information from anybody.
Sure.
But
we will take that back. And if we find out anything, we'll share it with you.
Okay, that'd be
Michelle,
great.
Michelle, before you go to your second question, is that for Kimberly or can Colleen answer it? Because she's going to be around. If Elizabeth's question is for Kimberly, I would rather have her answer the question and then come back to you, if that's okay with you.
If it's specifically for Kimberly, sure, that's fine.
Okay. Is it Elizabeth or?
My questions are more DOT than DOH.
No, Kimberly is DOT.
DOT. Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's Colleen or Kimberly. So
Go ahead, ask.
Okay.
Just ask.
We're good. So clearly, I totally support the set very simple criteria so that there are fewer individualized decisions. I'm very concerned about any of us having fingerprints on who wins and who doesn't win in this process in terms of advantaging individual restaurants and disadvantaging others. And I think many of the concerns that my colleagues have raised can be addressed by those kinds of criteria, like what is the number of width of feet of sidewalk clearance that is required to be maintained. To the concerns of retail stores, should all of these additional spaces be on the street side rather and make the sidewalk passage on the storefront side to provide access into and out of all retail stores. So my question here is, in the process of just creating criteria to minimize individual decisions, how are you proposing to deal with the situation where parking spots are on the other side of a bike lane? And, can we go ahead sort of now, or in this brief planning time before this becomes reality, just identify these are the bike lanes that will be moved in order to accommodate the use of parking spaces for this, because I think we have got to be forward thinking and become less dependent on automobiles, and we have got to retain bike lanes that people have come to rely upon. But if it's going to be a process of, well, you can have the parking spot, but it's on the other side of the bike lane, then we'll have to talk about, do we move the bike lane or not? I think we have a disaster.
So short answer before I jump off is that, again, more clarity in the coming days, but the thing about protected bike lanes, parking protected bike lanes in situations where there's parking on the other side of bike lanes is that that's not necessarily consistent design throughout the city. So to set a very, sort of simple.
All right, that is the design. That is the design on First and Second Avenues.
Right. So I guess what I would say
those
is that
are the areas in our community board. We need those addressed on a blanket basis.
Right. So I think that this conversation that you guys are having tonight is great, and that I think like sending that to us as a request makes sense for us to look at. I think that the sort of as of right condition will be that you can probably use the parking space, understanding that that's not going to be ideal for everyone. So how do we make adjustments in places where we have community boards and elected officials and others who are interested in a broader corridor level approach?
Okay.
So Valerie,
Go ahead.
when the time comes this evening, I think we should talk about a resolution.
Okay, that's fine.
And then also get Transportation Committee involved. But I think there is a clear opportunity and need here for a resolution from the community board.
Yeah, and we're going to go back to Michelle in a second, but I think a very important, Billy, if you can send that photo to Colleen, which shows the Jersey barriers, because I think that's what we're really talking about here in terms of shifting the bike lane, because if you were to use that curb lane and maybe take half the parking and put the bike lane, if you could engineer it so you could use those barriers to demarcate the bike lanes temporarily, the restaurant would get the space up to the parking, and that maybe a thinner space, if you will, for the bike lane, but it would be a protected bike lane using those barriers to give real protection. I could see the picture of and I think it's something that DOT should really seriously consider. Okay, I want to go back. I promised Michelle I would go back to her for the follow-up, and then we'll keep going. Thank you for staying.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm looking at the bill at intro 1957. Now, the mayor is in contrast with some of the things in this bill. However, he hasn't issued anything in writing, so we don't know just how much of it coincides. You know, we know the application process is different, but and any time we had a discrepancy in our discussion in the Transportation Committee about how zoning plays into this. And I thought maybe Colleen, you would have the answer, because I was looking on page 1 of 1957, it talks about open space. And it does talk about, you know, that in one section of a sidewalk where a sidewalk cafe would be permitted under the New York City zoning resolution. So that's on the first page of intro 1957. Now, has that whole consideration no longer an issue, I mean, for the mayor's point of view, or is this something that we need to be considering when we look for spaces? Because, for example, if you talk about a schoolyard, I don't know that that could be just for liability things. I don't know whether or not, you know, the city would be willing to turn over a schoolyard for a restaurant. The liability there would be extensive. But at any rate, that's a whole other story that I don't know. That's up to the city. But in terms of us looking for spaces, if we're going to look in accordance with intro 1957, those guidelines might be different than the mayor's. The mayor really hasn't put anything in writing that could clarify for us what he's referring to. And the second thing is, according to 1957, there is 5 days after the submission of an application for the permit to be granted. So that sounds like a good thing, because that means that they can be, you know, granted quickly. There's not a long waiting period. However, this resolution also calls for the community to be involved. So how could a space be granted within 5 days, and then within that time, get the space looked at the community level? In other words, I'm trying to understand how this all plays out together in the real, you know, in the real world, and how much of it is contradicted by what the mayor wants and what well, you understand what I'm saying. So as much information as you could give us on that, I would appreciate.
So you know what, I'll get back to you on how this how the legislation affects the current zoning laws. I wouldn't be able to tell you, because it all depends on, you know, where these business or restaurants are located. The other thing is that
they're located in places that are zoned for restaurants. That's not the concern. It's just if we're looking for other spaces, are we constricted by the zoning regulations, which 1957, to the way I interpret it, I think says we are. It's on the first page. It's in section 1. I think it's 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th paragraph. So, you know, the restaurants are of course in the right zone just by virtue of the fact that they're there. So I'm not worried about that. It's the alternative spots.
I think it's fair to say that, you know, the businesses that we will work with, or the restaurant owners who we will work with, we would have to share that information with the community board. We'll share that information because it will affect, your district as well. I mean, whether it's, making changes with a bike lane, or whether it's having to remove signage because of this temporarily, we will definitely have to share that with the community board. And I think that's what the legislation means.
The legislation is within a 5-day period.
I'm sure, we can, who knows if that will all be done within a 5-day period.
Doesn't
really
sound likely.
I don't know.
Doesn't sound like
5 is, I really don't know. I can't tell
whatever
you.
You can find out about it, we'd love to hear.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Who's next? Who's next? Anybody next?
Can't hear you.
Yeah. So thank you, Michelle. Elizabeth Rose, did you have anything else to follow up that wasn't DOT related?
No, other than thinking through a resolution related to relocating bike lanes, which we can discuss a little bit later.
Okay.
Okay. I just didn't want you to be cut off.
Judy was waving her hand, so I don't know if there's anybody else in the queue.
Judy, so I'll give you the list right now, and I'll let you go from there. I have Craig, and then Rita, then Barbara, then Judy, then Alita. But Judy is not a member of the committee, so she would be a member of the public. So if you want to go to her first.
Well, I think Judy, because she hasn't even spoken yet either. So go ahead, Judy.
Beautiful.
You have to
Judy,
unmute her.
You have to unmute yourself. There's a button.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. To answer your question, Valerie and Will, Elaine Walsh and Elizabeth Ashby's committee, the zoning committee, did a lot of work on public plazas over the last 3 years. So I think that Will, if you speak with Elaine, if you don't have the list in the office, the list is readily available. Nobody has to do any research. They have it all for our community district. That's it.
Thank you. So go in the order, Will. I've no, whoever's ready.
All right, so Craig, you're up first, then Rita, then Barbara, then Alita, then Marco.
All right, thank you. So I had a resolution I wanted to put forward, but first I had a question that is pertinent to it, and that's whether or not we're clear as to whether Intro 1957 is essentially dead because it's going to be superseded, or if that's still possibly going to move forward, because I think part of my issue and challenge in terms of how we move forward involves what we already did in transportation, where we discussed it. We have wording in our resolution that mentions generic legislation, but if we're talking about something that's not going to be codified, we want to probably talk about policies, and that would affect also the wording. So that's my question and that will help determine what I say next.
I really don't know I don't know the answer to that. If the mayor preempts it by actually just starting to do it, I'm not even sure whether the city council is really going to go forward with it. I didn't get the impression from Keith or Ben that it sounds to me like they've already said, okay, the mayor is in charge and whatever is going to happen next is going to come from DOT. I mean, they're already setting up the website. So I think if there's any input, Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume the electeds would be weighing in with DOT about various tweaks and to whatever the program is based on what they need in their community.
Sure, we would share that with the electeds, of course, yeah.
So Craig, I don't know if that influences what you're thinking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful, and I think so. What I would like to do, and I don't know how formally to do this, is to basically take the transportation resolution as it currently is worded and just modify a few things and just add a few be it resolved clauses. So what I was thinking, I could speak to it if seconded, would be whereas Community Board 8 would support I'm trying to figure out how it would be. Would request DOT to allow bike lanes to be shifted on First Avenue from 60th to 96th Street, and on Second Avenue to 96th Street to 63rd Street. And I only say 63rd because there are no restaurants below 63rd. So if we don't have to interfere with the approach to the bridge, all the better. Then another whereas clause saying Community Board 8 supports the use of public plazas, schoolyards, and other appropriate open sites to participate in a expanded outdoor seating program. And beyond that, just minor word changes like changing legislation to policies, that we support policies to expand outdoor seating, and to change where it says program to something like to any restaurant participating or that utilizing expanded outdoor seating. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Second, I'm happy to elaborate further, or as I said, I'm not sure how it works when we already have a resolution that's already in place that we can modify.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. Would it be easier to keep your resolution from the Transportation Committee the same, and then at the main board meeting, make a friendly amendment to your own resolution? I think that's Barry shaking his head, yes.
Yeah, I'm happy with that also.
And this way, you know, and Rita, the third, Barry's the second to that, and I'm sure Barry will offer the friendly amendment if you give it to him. He's saying yes. Yeah, I think that, you know, that could work and sort of adapt to what happened to us, because basically what happened at transportation is we came up with this good resolution, and the next morning the mayor basically took the chair out from under us by sort of circumventing the legislation.
And can I just add one thing?
Sure.
And because obviously, as mentioned tonight, we'll learn more later in the week, likely after our meeting tomorrow. Maybe we plan on having more detailed discussions about specific locations at our July Transportation Committee meeting, which would be, I guess, the soonest meeting where it would be likely to be able to be discussed. We could plan on that right now.
Yeah. I do want to jump the order, because I think in the names that we'll put forward there, Marco wanted to speak and he hasn't spoken yet. So I'm just sensitive to giving everybody a chance to talk before we get to a second round of people. So.
Sounds great. And Craig, just to highlight, the date for that meeting would be July 1st, the transportation meeting, if that's when it was. Marco, you'll have to push a button to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Marco. Go ahead.
First of all, yes, it's true, the plazas. I did the study very deeper with Terry, and then who the next did the study was Elaine. And what we find it is, in theory, we have more than 100 plazas in our community. But when we start doing the research, we found that probably we reach approximately 88 plazas. And from the 88 plazas, the problem is, for instance, you see the plazas on York Avenue, all of them are gardens. So you cannot put nothing over there because you have a driveway and you have a beautiful landscape. And that is the accessible plazas. For the other, there are other types of plazas that the developer purposely they put in a higher level. So basically then become the problem of the accessibility for those people that want to go in plazas that have at different levels. And then there is another developer that put the plazas almost underground. I think is in the building is on, I think is in 2nd Avenue and 87th Street. You have to go down. So some of the plazas, I found it very depressing that they receive a lot of floor area in order to give the plazas for the community, but it didn't happen that way. And this is why they stopped the plazas in our community. Well, even though my belief is, I think it's a good idea to have plazas, but plazas that to have access to the public. But in this case, we need that, but we don't have available. And that probably will be very frustrated to start thinking in that direction. Maybe we'll have maybe 50% of that available. And all of them basically is coming the issue of liability. The other point that I would like to raise is my concern is they are allowed to the restaurant to operate 50% of the capacity. And I just make a numbers right away myself. And the only thing that you can put, because you had to leave 8 feet required by the circulation on the sidewalk. And then you have approximately no more than 14 chairs outside, which basically, I don't know if 14 chairs, it will make a difference for the reduction of 50% of the capacity. So the restaurants probably won't make up the number of tables or chairs that they are losing inside. And I think that is my major concern. The other point, and that's the restaurant, they love to have the sidewalk outside because they attract business. But they have other places, other restaurants, they can use the rear yards. The rear yard, I always am against to use the rear yard, but this is the time to use the rear yard so they can make the in the back make an extension of the tables. But the problem is not attracting for business. And then you have the problem, what I perceive is they don't have enough income. And whatever you do, and then you face the problem of we're living in a high density space, very high density that we are fighting now, bicycles and cars. And right now it's almost empty, the streets. So it's easier to propose something, but when the whole business will come back, then we will start crying because the cars won't be able to move. So we have to be very careful if we're going to use the space. Probably the more reasonable idea is definitely to take the bicycles lines, because you say clearly the parking car create a buffer between the cars and the customers of the restaurant. And even in that condition, probably they won't be able to reach the full capacity of the restaurant inside. So this is a serious business, a serious problem that they are facing, this small business. Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. Will, who else?
Yeah. You have Rita, Barbara, Rudder, Alita, lower Marco's hand, Michelle, Elizabeth Rose. So I'm just going to go from the top, if that's all right. Or...
Sure, that's fine. That's fine.
All right, Rita.
Across the street from where I live, there are 5 restaurants on a block. And then yet around the corner from the blood center where we meet, there's only 1 restaurant on the block. And therefore they can really spread out during the day. So there's a fairness issue here. The other thing is that if we have to practice social distancing, are we going through hoops for 2 tables and 4 people?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that's a really important point. I wish, I don't know if there are any, Courtney, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as an owner of a restaurant type shop, I mean, what do you really think? I mean, I've spoken to some of the guys who run the diners along First Avenue, and they're like, you know, 5 tables isn't really going to help me get my business back. So you're right, Rita, when you say, when you look at, you know, what are we really doing? We're going to be moving bike lanes and we're going to be eliminating all these things. And is it to serve, you know, 4 more people an hour? I mean, that isn't really going to help these guys make up their bottom line. So that's an interesting question, but I don't know, Courtney, I don't want to force you to speak, but we haven't heard from you tonight. So I was just wondering if you had any reaction to what you've been hearing. You don't have to. But...
Oh, no, it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've actually been kind of, Mick was inviting me to these and they were always on Monday. You guys know I love to attend as many meetings as possible, but as you know, it was mentioned previously, like I'm here chained to UES. I have been since this all went down. I have a friend working the front right now, so that way I can attend this, but on Mondays, it's just me. I've just kind of been a little hesitant to jump in there because everyone, and it's very kind, everyone is reaching out. How are you doing? What can we do? There's all these conversations that have been happening, but I can tell you firsthand, obviously I was very fortunate that number one, food was deemed essential so that I could stay open the ice cream shop portion. And then obviously number 2, that we can now do the carry out and to go. I wanted to create something a little bit different. I'm sure everyone knows with the restaurants, around you, that everyone's doing things to go and like, there's not really a worry of glass. Everyone is doing it in plastic cups, coffee cups, plastic bags, so on and so forth. For me, if you guys have ordered or seen it, I'm doing the sippy cups. I wanted it to be like a little fun, a little bit, similar. Because if anyone has been here and knows anything about UES, we're not really vodka, soda, beers. We're all these extravagant cocktails, and I wanted to stay as close to that as possible. So I bought ice cream cones and rainbows and fun things, and it comes with ice cream, just try to make it a little bit different. But I can tell you, and I'm not one to complain. I really am not. I've been in this industry 22 years between Vegas and New York. I've been through almost anything you could possibly imagine. This has obviously been something completely different, and in a lot of ways, I live on 89th and 2nd, so I'm fortunate that I'm right around the corner. The Upper East Side is not only where my business is, but my home. You guys know I opened this specifically to be here for our community, and I can only speak to my specific block. So you guys know where I am, or if you don't know where I am, I'm on 2nd Avenue between 88th and 89th. To the right of me is the writing room, the Old Lanes. I share the building 1707 with the Brown Cup Coffee Shop, who's also remained open this entire time. Across the street, we've got Rathbones, who, David is the manager there. He's there every day, all day. The diner has certainly been a big help. And then, Carino just opened up the small Italian restaurant across the street. Libertador, same thing. So when this first started, it was really just
What happened?
Oh, I don't know. I heard someone talking. I thought maybe.
Keep going. Keep going.
Oh,
keep
okay.
going.
When this first happened, it was me and Rathbones really that stayed open. Writing room wasn't open. It was hard to adjust to do everything the right way. All my friends, my personal friends were let go. All my employees, obviously, I had to let them go. Unemployment was almost impossible to get through. I still have employees now that are just getting all their retro unemployment because obviously, and every system, every department is overloaded right now. I mean, just listening to this conversation, it's very, it's wonderful that everyone cares, but I can tell you firsthand, everyone is just trying to survive to the point where owners have come to me, they're in tears. I mean, it was last week, we were all boarding our doors. I drilled my doors shut. We're taking our iPads out because you guys know what happened on 86 and Lex. Now we're not just worried about a virus, but we're worried about our storefronts getting damaged and looted, and it's overwhelming. And not to mention the fact, a lot of people are so upset because they're in quarantine and they're bored. We're exhausted. I haven't had one single day off since before March, and that's okay. I'm a business owner, just like you would take care of your baby or you would do whatever. Like, that's okay. It's completely all right. But then, I also know owners that it sucks. It always comes down to the landlord, right? Luckily, my landlord is decent, whereas I know other business owners where the landlord is just using this as a way to weed them out. And I know that everything has been extended, that you can't kick them out, but there was never anything said that you don't have to pay your rent. Like, for instance, my landlord, he was nice about it for, a month or two. Now he's pulling from my security deposit. I mean, and that's money I should get back. That's not money that should go to pay my rent because of a pandemic. So it's frustrating. Some businesses have closed because, to run a business in New York City and to survive and to even turn a profit is exhausting in its own right. But then to go up against all of this and you're trying to do right by the public, and just specifically on my block, it's a constant fight. It's a constant battle of people that are so angry about the crowds. And then you have this other younger generation that is everyone's losing their minds a little bit to a certain extent, where it was said before, yes, we can all eat and drink, we can get food delivered to us, but what people are missing, it's one of the reasons why I'm in the hospitality industry, is that they're missing that connection, and they're missing, going out and talking and venting and all the things that we need just to, be okay on a normal day. I mean, there's a reason why a happy hour exists. You get out of work and you need to go and bitch about work for an hour with your friends. It is that social connection. And then on the block, you see fights on the daily. There's people that are mad because they're standing too close. They're yelling at people. And the cops, I'm very close with the 19th precinct. I mean, some of you know, some of you don't, but, right when I opened back in 2017, I was robbed. It was this big thing. And, the 19th precinct was great. And I've always been very close with them. I'm always, I bring them ice cream once a month. they come and they specifically watch the shop for me, and they're exhausted. Obviously, I'm sure you heard what happened to Kathleen Walsh's car. It got lit on fire. I mean, they're so overwhelmed. And I saw complete, change this past weekend as to the weekend before. The weekend before, people are out in crowds, the cops come by, they break it up, they go in their separate corners, and then as soon as the cops leave, they come right back out. This past weekend, it was like Bourbon Street out front. It was like, and the cops didn't even come. And I'm talking to some of them at the 19th, and they're so overwhelmed trying to protect businesses from looting and protesters that there's not enough of them to come around. And it's and again, to something that was said about how it's on the business to police this, and yes it is, but I can tell you firsthand, for me, I'm a little bit fortunate in the sense that yes, people come to you, yes, for to-go cocktails, but we still have the element of kids, right? So nobody really wants to hang out in front of my shop and drink with their friends because there's kids around. And since the shop is so small, if you've ever been to UES, the ice cream portion is so small that all of our guests have been, very aware and, understanding, one group comes in, one family comes in, the next family waits outside, and as soon as that family leaves, then the next one comes in. So they're kind of policing themselves. But in the small couple of times where we have had young people that were already intoxicated that ordered cocktails from us, we ask them to move. We politely ask them to move. They don't move. They don't want to move. They step over 2 feet and then they come right back. And then, so now instead of answering the phone, which is, going like crazy, trying to scoop ice cream, trying to make cocktails, you're spending your time policing, and then you call and they're overwhelmed. Like the other night when the looting first happened, I closed up the shop. It was like 11 o'clock and there was 6 young male guys with their heads in face masks. I mean, I kid you not, in face masks, walking up the street past the curfew. I called 911, of course, because I knew exactly where they were going. What they were doing was suspicious. It took like, by the time they called me back, it was like 45 minutes. So I get it. I understand everything and everyone's overwhelmed. And, everyone always asks me, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? And I'm never one to say, please, we need your money, but that's it. That's the only thing right now small businesses truly, truly need is patrons, orders to go. And I understand that as somebody that is, there's a small amount of people that is still working and then obviously collecting unemployment, but how can you support all your favorite restaurants and all your favorite businesses? It's impossible. You want to help, but then you help your Indian restaurant tonight, your Mexican restaurant tomorrow, and you can't be spending money like crazy either when the income's not coming in. So it's just tough all around. I'm definitely fortunate on my specific block. We all get together and we're kind of like a band of brothers deciding when we're going to open and when we're going to close. And to the noise point, even though this past weekend was a little bit different, I've noticed a different trend in drinking. Obviously, when it's normal operations, people like to drink later because they stay out later and they have dinner late. But this is not the case. We get very busy around 4 o'clock, and people, the streets are quiet by 9 o'clock. So I feel like it's only fair to, if you have to deal with a little bit of noise between 8 and 9 p.m. so that these restaurants can sell some cocktails, I think it's only fair because there's nobody going past 9 o'clock really. Rathbones is, it's a pub and they are done by 8 o'clock, sometimes 8:30. This past weekend it was 9. We're done by like 9:30, 10, only because we get that after dinner rush for ice cream. So I think everyone, and to the other point, which I said, I apologize, I'm probably speaking too much, but Carino across the street, right, they're a very small Italian restaurant, as mentioned before. On their normal patio license, they can allow for 2 tables, maybe 3. It's like two tops and 1 4-top. And to the right of them is Selena Rosa, and then to the left of them was Genesis. Well, both Selena Rosa and Genesis are businesses that are out. You guys know they had the fires in both of those buildings and they were both forced to go, or they had to leave because of the fire. So those are essentially dead spaces. I know we're talking about plazas and things we can get the go ahead, but what about the spaces that are just dead because there's no business there? You're going to have to get the landlord to play ball, I'm sure, to say, hey, can we put some tables out front? but I can tell you, and not to get anybody in trouble, but they're doing it. They're just doing it. They don't know, you know, poor Carino, they're so small. They barely know. We all don't know. I've never made cocktails to go. I mean, I had to invest in an entirely new business. I bought Ziploc bags and to-go containers and, you know, covered straws and, you know, just stuff you never would think of. But you adapt as a business owner. You have to if you want to stay alive. But you know, they are kind of getting creative and popping up tables and trying to control things as much as you can. But we're outnumbered by the amount of people that just want to be out and drink, and not to drink, but just to be out, I guess.
Yeah, I think Rita was the one who brought that up, but I think that's really it. I mean, people are just starved for social interaction.
Yeah.
And the takeout is just a place where everyone is meeting up with other people. And so it's a chance to do that. Thank you very much. Obviously, we wish you the best. And, you know, we're always talking up. And I think that's one thing that we can do is just to try to publicize who's open, who's serving. And as I think Bob said in the very beginning of this, is to really try to shop local as much as we can and to keep everybody as, you know, you're right, you can't go to 10 restaurants in a night, but you can try to spread it around and go local and this way we will continue to have a vibrant community. Thanks a lot, Courtney. Okay, Will, did we have anybody else? I mean, I want to get to the resolution. I don't want to keep everybody
Rita,
here.
did you get your question and your statement all the way answered before I mute you back? Rita Popper.
No, it's been answered.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. Colleen, I just
so-
want to ask you one question, or is there somebody else? Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, Barbara, Alita, Michelle, and Elizabeth
Oh, okay.
are the
All right.
last.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Barbara, you may have to push a button.
Unmute. Really, what I was going to say is following up what Courtney said. Can you hear me? Am I okay?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Follow up. There's so much extra space, and I think we just have to be flexible. I have 3 things to say. This is one. So for instance, all of these lots where they were supposed to do construction and really they're not because they weren't before, these lots that remain empty. As an example, the lot that goes from 86th Street around First Avenue and down 85th Street. On 85th Street, there's something like 3 restaurants right there. Instead, we can't use the street. The street is too narrow. But there's so much room. And if you don't like going to a restaurant where the waiter will have to walk a little bit, don't go to it. But it will give you a lot more room than the 2 or 3 tables. The second thing I'd like to say is I'm a little worried about our resolution saying that we have to come back to the community board. We are meeting tomorrow. That means we won't meet again until mid-July. If the phase 1 comes in the end of June, are we saying that nobody can open up streets, tables until mid-July when we vote on it and have it go through? We don't have time for this. I think we need to be a little flexible, not worry about zoning, that we have to worry about health, we have to worry about safety. What is the safest place to put things? But other things, I just think we ought to give DOT the right to make a choice based on what is best, you know, in terms of safety and so on. We don't have time. We only meet once a month. If things don't get through in July, we are not meeting in August. And this is just not fair. It's not fair to the restaurants, and it's really not fair to patrons that will like to have a dinner served to them. I think that maybe some of the frustration with the young people would be a little bit less. And that's my comment. And the only other thing I'd like to ask is we do have bus lanes. I assume there won't be bus lanes anymore if we do put it on the street. Is that right? That we would eliminate the bus lane?
No, I don't think Colleen's saying that at all. I think Colleen's saying that that's the least movable thing that we've got going, is that the bus lane has to stay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Colleen, but I don't think
the tables would go further away than the bus lane, so the waiter will have to go through the bus lane to get to the table?
I think, you know, every location, we will have to review them carefully to make decisions on placements of tables and chairs. And again, every location, every restaurant location is very different and unique in its own way. I think it will vary in terms of numbers of tables and chairs that will be allotted outside, given the space that we have to work with.
I hope we could use sidewalks as much as possible, even if
Also
it's not
too.
legitimate for now.
And keep in mind, this is all temporary until things get back to normal, hopefully.
Of course.
Yeah.
Really until about October, because we don't eat outside once it gets cold.
Yeah.
So really, you're talking about such a limited amount of time. We're going to wait for resolutions, a meeting again and everything. You're really taking away the whole bit, the whole time that we can have this outdoor.
I know, I understand it's a slow process, but the governor and the mayor just wanted to make sure that, we look at how we're reopening New York City, because again,
I agree with that. I'm talking about the community board holding things up further. I totally agree with, understand what the mayor and governor are doing. I'm just talking about further delays because of resolutions that we would have.
Okay, well, who's next?
Alita, and then Michelle, and then Elizabeth.
Okay, all right.
Alita.
I'm assuming Elizabeth is coming back at the end with a resolution, but okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, guys. I would like to say, and I don't know how the mechanics would work, I think it's a shame to exclude community boards. They've been excluded from every mayoral process or group designed to deal and look at the COVID response, but I won't spend any time on this. I'd like to suggest that the governor rethink the definition of indoor-outdoor space, because recent studies have shown it's the fresh air even coming into an enclosed space. And for all of those restaurants who have the ability to open their sidewalk doorways and windows so that people sitting in those tables, even though they're technically on the inside, they have the same effect from the fresh air as tables sitting on the sidewalk, that those be considered outdoor tables just along that perimeter for this purpose. We would avoid the whole potentially either allow the restaurant to make more money or avoid having to move bike lanes and risk people's safety if we just consider that those tables, even though technically on the inside, are really on the outside in terms of fresh air. And I don't know if this was addressed, and if it was, I apologize, but there are places, and we know who they are, that have not been good neighbors and have not been healthy participants in this lockdown process, because they've been serving liquor, they've been playing music, they've been allowing their patrons to congregate. And I'm not sure why they should be allowed to self-certify when they've not been conforming to the regulations that we currently have. And for people, even when they are conforming and able to self-certify, people standing on the sidewalk, they're used to getting drinks at the bar while they're waiting. Will they not be allowed to have a drink standing and waiting for a table? Or does that clearly conflicts with the no drinking on the sidewalks? So I'm just wondering, because restaurants make the bulk of their money from drinking, how all of that will intersect. And so thank you, Colleen, and thank you, Valerie.
Sure. Who's up next?
Next, Michelle.
Michelle. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, because we were talking about the difference between the mayor and intro 1957. Just to tell you the information, the DOT is in charge in both cases. So the mayor has put the DOT in charge of choosing spaces, and so did intro 1957. So they're basically the agency that we're dealing with. However, they are, as Colleen pointed out, they're not an enforcing agency. So we don't know, it doesn't sound as though any special enforcement is going to happen. Another bit of information is that a lot of what Elaine and Elizabeth and Marco studied were POPs, and those were private public spaces, and those are different than plazas. The POPs have a private, private part of them, and many of them don't have, which is sort of strange, but many of them do not have access from the street. There are POPs where you have to actually go into a lobby of a building and then into the space that was determined to be a POP. So if we're actually going to do an inventory of them, access has to be something that we look at. I want to make another comment. I happen to think it's premature for a resolution, and I'll tell you why. or even unnecessary, as aside from premature, and I'll tell you why. The Transportation Committee has their resolution, even if intro 1957 isn't exactly, going forward, a lot of it will apply. In other words, what we're asking for would simply still be there. We're asking for it. And so it would be under the consideration of the DOT. The DOT is choosing spaces. I imagine they're going to talk to the DOH and whoever they have to talk to choose what they consider are safe spaces, and also to make a decision in terms of whether or not they can move bus lanes. Or not bus lanes, they don't want to move bus, whether or not they can safely move bicycle lanes, whether or not they can be in a parking lane. They're going to look into that. So for us, and they're doing it with an eye towards providing open space. So for us to have a resolution to ask them to do this with an eye towards providing, restaurant space, to me seems unnecessary. It calls for another layer of bureaucracy that I don't think we need if you want to move quickly. I think this was a very good conversation and that we understand what has to be done. Colleen has been here, I hope, and I assume taking notes. Kimberly was here. I think she's well aware of what the community wants and what the concerns are. And of course, we would love everybody to come back to us for confirmation of what it is that they're planning. I know they will aim to do that. I have no particular expectation that that's going to happen. But again, nor do I think it's even possible in the sense that because of the time constraint. I think what will more likely happen is places will be selected. Those store owners or restaurant owners that want to will use them. They will be aggressive enough in going onto the site to self-certify and get their applications. For them, it means everything in the world. They don't need an affirmation from us. To them, it's their livelihood. It means everything. And where there is a problem, the community is going to be the recipient of the complaints. And I think that's more likely that that's where we're going to play a role than this initial stage. So I would sort of let it play out. I think the DOT understands us. They know what they have to do. They're fully cognizant of what they can do in terms of actually providing the street space, and whether or not it's profitable for the business, because it's much ado about two tables, that's going to be for the business to decide, not for us to decide. So I really don't think we need a resolution. I think everything has been aired. I think Colleen and Kimberly have heard it. I know I've been reaching out to the DOH, in terms of my committee and my responsibility. I imagine others on this community board have been reaching out as well. And so I think we should just say that this was a very good conversation to be continued, and hope that Colleen can come back to us with some of the questions that we did have, because it would really be nice if we did want to go forward with any additional suggestions, to have the information that was missing tonight. So to me, without that information and without seeing how this plays out, I think another resolution is premature. Thank you.
Well, Elizabeth, are you gonna, I appreciate your comments, Michelle. I can't say that I disagree. I was actually thinking while you were talking that maybe we expand the friendly amendment to Craig's resolution to sort of, if we can get, I'm not trying to preempt Elizabeth, she can make her own motion, but maybe a compromise position based on this wide-ranging discussion would be to include in the friendly amendment that we would be in favor of considering moving the bike lane. So at least we would go on record that that was something that the community board was behind. Craig, I don't know what you think about that, as opposed to having a separate resolution of some kind.
I think, I just want to make sure I was unmuted. I think it could go either way. Personally, I think it would, it could work well being a friendly amendment into the existing one. I think we can put in some clear language to specify that any bike lane shift should maintain a protected type of bike lane. I know Elizabeth was talking about, and Billy was talking about, making sure that we have barriers in place to protect bikers, and if there is a way that we can be specific so that we can have it formulated in a way there where servers wouldn't have to cross over a bike lane, all the better. But I leave it to others to decide the best approach to doing that.
Okay, well, I don't want to preempt Elizabeth from speaking, so I'm going to give the floor to Elizabeth, and you can do whatever you want. Go ahead.
All right. So I heard very clearly from the DOT that they would look to us to address, to give them direction to address the bike lane issue. And I do think that the bike lanes represent a barrier on both First and Second Avenues to allowing restaurants to safely take advantage of this proposal to create a new approach to expanding sidewalk cafe capacity, which I think, I've now heard the Transportation Committee discuss this. I've now heard the Small Business Committee discuss this. There's clearly some urgency in supporting our small businesses. So I would like to propose a resolution. Community Board 8, and I have put this in the chat text to Will so he can share it out to everyone. Community Board 8 requests the Department of Transportation to relocate the bike lanes on First and Second Avenues within the CB8 boundaries to the outside of the parking lanes, i.e. away from the sidewalk towards the traffic lanes of the avenue, in order to facilitate extended sidewalk cafe capacity for local restaurants, as long as social distancing requirements prevent restaurants from utilizing their full indoor capacity. CB8 further requests DOT provide barriers such as Jersey barriers to protect the sidewalk cafes from the bike lanes, and also to protect the bike lanes from vehicular traffic.
Okay. Does somebody want to second the motion, or?
I see Billy has a thumbs up second.
Does anybody want to talk a little bit more about the resolution, or do you feel like we're ready to vote on it, or?
I see 2 people have raised their hand, 3 people have raised their hands since
Okay.
that.
Go
so
ahead.
I'm going to go to Felice, and then Russell, and then Cause.
Great.
Felice, you may have to push a button to confirm. There you go.
So I think it's a great idea to have Jersey barriers to protect the area and to have a designated space for restaurants. I'm concerned that DOT doesn't have the ability to, or even sufficient numbers of Jersey barriers to place it down. And if we're asking them to do that, their whole procurement process to secure an adequate number of Jersey barriers could be prohibitive. So maybe rephrasing that a little. And so rather than having DOT procure the Jersey barriers, we encourage some way of supporting either the businesses purchasing Jersey barriers, or DOT assisting, or something like that, so that we're not holding up the process, but we are providing a secure space for the businesses to operate. So that's just my concern.
Thank you, Felice. I'm going to move on to Russell and Cause and Alita and Craig. Russell.
So I guess my question, I mean, I don't know what we're thinking in terms of how much space everything takes up, but it just seems like if you're going to have 2 Jersey barriers, you're going to have a Jersey barrier on each side of a bike lane that's already extended out into the street, I guess, because you're using some of the space for the restaurants. Does that take up the entire street at that point, or how much space is left over? I mean, is there a lane left, or 2 lanes, or what? I mean, as a practical matter, what's going to be sort of left to actually still have it be a street? that would be my concern, I guess. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you have a view on that or what the answer to that is.
I think the main idea here is to make our point that bike lanes should still be protected and the sidewalk cafes need to still be protected. That Jersey barriers is an idea for how to accomplish that, but not necessarily that is the only solution.
So maybe instead of the part of the resolution that says that we request, well, we're only saying provide a barrier such as, we're just making a suggestion in terms of the resolution. We're not saying that has to be it. But I think the point that Elizabeth is making is that we're asking for protection for both the bike lane and the people that are using it. So I think it's fairly.
I actually had originally written as such as, but not limited to Jersey barriers.
That's not, would that answer your question, Russell, or make you feel a little bit, I mean, we're not, and to Felice too, I don't think we're just saying, hey, we've seen these, they work. I don't, and they may not be, maybe they will only be needed for First and Second Avenue. So there may be enough Jersey barriers in the inventory when you look across the city or for whatever we have to do. Or I'm sure somebody can come up with a solution. Will, who's next?
So I have.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, I mean, first of all, I guess it would be helpful just to get a clear understanding of what a Jersey barrier is as opposed to other types of barriers. But I think once you're specifying some kind of barrier, it seems to me like it's a situation where I think we need some flexibility. I mean, what we have is basically this kind of emergency circumstance where there's been a recognition that, obviously space that hasn't been used a certain way in the past, there's a need for that space because of an exigency that's been created because the restaurants need more outdoor space. And the flip side is that there's just a lot less traffic of all kinds on the streets. And so the goal is to try to match those up and be as flexible as possible in addressing that issue. And I think it makes sense to word the resolution in a way that's sort of a little less prescriptive and that kind of maintains the possibility for that maximum flexibility. And so for that reason, I think, including the specification about the example of a Jersey barrier, or how many barriers we need, or things like that. I mean, I just think it's overly specific and it's overly limiting. And again, I mean, I still don't know what the ultimate impact is for the rest of the street. Like if there's any remainder of the street left open at that point, it's a little bit unclear. And I think, basically, I think all the concerns in terms of how the street is ordinarily used, all of that I think has to kind of fall by the wayside to an extent. And I think there has to be a recognition that at this point, there's less demand for parking. So let's just get rid of some of the parking so that we can use the space for restaurants. And there's less demand for streets. Let's get rid of that, or let's use that in a creative way. And I just think I think we should be doing that sort of uniformly. And for that reason, I think we should just maintain some flexibility and not necessarily have this specification for the additional barriers with the bike lanes.
Yeah, I do want to say that I think I would take issue with the fact, I think there's much more of a demand for parking right now. I mean, today, Second Avenue was a complete parking lot. The traffic was at pre-COVID bumper to bumper. So I think there are actually going to be more cars coming into Manhattan. I know that a lot of businesses are making arrangements for their employees to come in by personal car. So I think we can expect even more traffic in the coming months. So I don't see that as going away. I mean, I don't have one, and I don't think Sarah does either, any preference about the barrier. I mean, if it would make it more palatable, I mean, we would request that we're asking for just to make sure that the bike lanes are protected. We want to be able to extend, well, we're actually doing more than that. I don't know, Elizabeth, it's your resolution, so.
I think there are two possible ways to go. One would be to say, we request that the Department of Transportation requirements for extended side cafes is a barrier to protect the cafe from the adjacent bike or traffic lanes. And we request the DOT ensure that relocated bike lanes are protected from vehicular traffic. Doesn't specify how, it's just putting in place we would like to maintain some sort of protection.
Okay, I like that better. I think being less specific, I think is a little better. That works for me if we want to do it that way.
Okay. Will, who's next?
I would just say that I think this is our opportunity to share what we want, and it's even better to be able to share it before the regulations come out. And in the event that it jogs something in one of the administrators, in their writing pens as they're making decisions. And DOT says no to us all the time. And so like if they determine that there's a problem with traffic and so they can't put a barrier up, they'll say no and they'll tell us why. And so I don't think we should limit what we ask for. Of course, Russell, I totally get your point about wanting to be thoughtful about not being too prescriptive. But I think that this is an opportunity for us to say what we want. And when the guidelines come out, then we may have something different that we want to request.
Thank you, Sarah. We have Kaz, Alita, and Craig left.
Okay, go ahead, Kaz.
Yeah, I agree with Russell and I agree with Michelle and I agree with Elizabeth. I guess we all in agreement that we must do something. But in the meantime, it's only going to be 2 or 3 months. Do we want DOT to spend millions or billions of dollars on something that's going to be temporary for 2 or 3 months? Do we want to be specific? And, if we keep it simple, if we keep it to the KISS method, basically, we don't know. Let's just say so the public is protected, the traffic is protected, rather than be specifics. Now, on an unrelated question, we're trying to help restaurants, we're trying to help businesses, we're trying to basically do as much as we can for the businesses. But, some time ago, somebody spent 500 million on a wish. 500 billion went on a wish. 500 billion went to a few corporations. I'm not a mathematician, but how much would each person have gotten had it gone to each individual person? That's it.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, Kaz. Moving to Alita, and then Craig will be after that.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there should be anything about revisiting what the streets and the bike lanes and the traffic looks like in a month or so, if people have been hurt or things are just not working out. The other thing is someone had mentioned, I think it was Courtney, the empty storefronts. If we could ask the city to intervene if there's a space next to a restaurant and talk to the landlord of that space on behalf of the restaurant to be able to use the sidewalk. And as indoor seating is allowed, to ask the owners of other spaces if tables, I know there are liability and all kinds of issues, but if those spaces could be used for restaurants so that ultimately they'd have the same number of seats, but just spread out more so that but the city is actually doing that instead of an individual small restaurant or business owner. I know it has nothing to do with the bike lanes, but just in terms of getting things out there, because people are also really nervous about a second wave or a third wave. And if we're thinking about helping restaurants and stores, I think we have to be longer term in our approach and not just thinking about the warmer weather. But I'll stop now. Thank you.
Craig?
Craig.
Just need to unmute myself. So I was just going to offer a slight change as well, hearing comments here and just thinking further about my concerns regarding language.
Craig, Craig, all of a sudden it's really hard to hear you. I mean, I don't know if, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little better, yes.
Okay. So just in response to what the comments I've been hearing and thinking further through the concept of reversing the protected bike lane so it would be on the outside with barriers, I'm wondering whether it would be better to say something like any expansion of outdoor seating on First and Second Avenues, maintain the protected bike lanes and prioritize the safety of restaurant personnel and staff in that Community Board 8 supports DOT temporarily shifting bike lanes as needed on First Avenue and Second Avenue.
Craig, can you send that in the text in the chat, please?
Yes. And I also, thinking through this as well, wonder, I still am personally thinking it may be better as a friendly amendment to the transportation one, that it fits in that context. And it would still be a joint resolution between committees, but it may just be easier to handle tomorrow night as well. Just give me a moment and I'll get that in the chat.
Okay, so we will. So you're saying, well, again, it's Elizabeth's motion, so I'll leave it to her. But what you're really proposing is what we would be voting on now is a friendly amendment from the Small Business Committee to the transportation resolution.
Yes.
Okay.
And Will, can we do that? A cross-committee friendly amendment?
I don't see why not. Because a friendly amendment is a friendly amendment. And so as long as somebody will propose it, and so if one of the two of you wants to propose it as, yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
So if it is kosher for this committee to pass a friendly amendment to another committee, as long as this then gets addressed by the Transportation Committee for tomorrow's full board meeting, I am fine with that as an approach.
I'm sorry,
Well,
I actually thought I was
how about
explaining that for tomorrow, not for tonight.
Well, how about if we do, yeah, for tomorrow, how about if we do this? What if we vote on Elizabeth's resolution, okay? And assuming that comes out positive, the Transportation Committee will go first and we can propose our friendly amendment. If it doesn't work out, we can just have our own resolution. Michelle's saying no. It doesn't matter. Whatever you guys want to do. I don't know, Sarah, I don't have one preferred way of doing it versus the other.
Well, we could vote on it in our committee, and then if transportation goes first, that we can say that we're amenable to them taking it up as part of transportation.
Okay.
If
So
Elizabeth would like to speak during the transportation part of the agenda, and she can refer to it, and so everyone will have it in their documentation, and make her a friendly amendment.
okay. Elizabeth, are you okay? Do you see the resolution in the chat now?
Hold on, I have to pull up the chat.
Craig, is that for tomorrow night or tonight? Is what somebody asked in the chat.
Depends on how, I guess that's up to
Okay.
Elizabeth who proposed the original
I think
resolution.
we should just do it as, look, we could just do, Michelle, what are you saying? I see you moving and. Can you unmute?
I think this can be, I think it should be for tomorrow night, because you're gonna make it very complicated tomorrow night with cross committee talking and somebody talking during one committee.
Okay, well,
If this is what you want to do,
I'll change the motion. I make a motion that we nominate Elizabeth to make this friendly amendment tomorrow night to the transportation resolution. How about that?
But we don't need it as a resolution.
If
We're
she
not going to
agrees,
vote on that. That's silly.
okay. If Elizabeth, you're okay with it, is because again,
Yeah, Elizabeth.
I leave that to Elizabeth.
muted.
She made her original resolution. If you want to stick with it, or are you happy using this?
I am, since I was a participant at the Transportation Committee meeting that voted on this initial resolution. And in fact, I actually had sent the be it resolved language and drafted that with Will Freeland. I am comfortable if this committee effectively is deputizing me to speak tomorrow at Transportation to propose this amendment. I think there is value and it carries some weight if this committee makes that formal in some way, that is what this committee would like to do. But Valerie, I leave that to you and Sarah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would prefer to be in one resolution together when it goes out. And that, I feel, confident that at least, I think, hearing most people on this committee, they're ready to vote in favor of the Transportation Committee amendment with this resolution. So.
Then I'm fine with that.
Okay, all right. So somebody send Sarah, because I don't think you get to save your chat. So somebody send to Elizabeth, whether it's Sarah, the friendly amendment that she's going to say at the meeting tomorrow night.
And it'll be referred to in the minutes, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Because otherwise I think, is Colleen still here or did she leave?
Colleen just left. She said she had to
I
run.
feel badly that we didn't get to say thank you for staying. So, all right, everybody, do we need to make a motion to end our meeting?
Rita has her hand up still.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rita. I'm sorry, Rita. I didn't know that. Oh, but we can't hear her.
Rita, you may have to push a button at the bottom of your screen. There you go.
Do we call the question? Are we voting?
We're not going to vote. We're not going to vote.
And
anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow night. See you tomorrow night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.